Between Fire and Ice, a Mongolian Steppe Survival Mystery. Part 1. The Frozen Steppe, Life and Survival. 1. Before winter descends on the vast Orkhon steppe, where winds howled from the north and snow could fall even on summer days, a thin wisp of smoke curled from a gyr, like the gentle breath of the land. The cold hadn't yet fully enveloped the steppe, but the ancient Mongols had seen the signs. Wild geese flying south in arrow formation, the thicker coats on their horses' necks, and the early seasonal winds carrying the damp chill of snow yet to fall. Chieftain Batbeleg stood before his gyr, gazing towards the horizon where the sun sank faster each day. He was a man who had survived the 4 most brutal winters in Mongol memory. This year he was old. His eyes were no longer as sharp as they once were, but his sense for the silent death of winter had never failed him. Behind him stood Bat Erdene, his 17-year-old son, chosen to inherit the chieftainship. But Bat Erdene was young, impetuous, and had never seen blood freeze on a knife's edge, never woken in the dead of night to check the herds against marauding wolves. "Father," Bat Erdene said, "this year doesn't seem too bad. The grass is still green in the lowlands." Batbeleg didn't turn. He spoke softly. "The cold doesn't come from the snow. It comes from where you cannot see it, within the hearts of men." 2. Gyrs, fire, and preparation. The Mongols didn't build houses. They erected gyrs. These circular dwellings, made from wooden frames covered in pressed felt, withstood strong winds and retained warmth. At the center of each gyr was a hearth, not just for cooking, but a symbol of life. The fire was never to be extinguished. A dead fire was an omen of misfortune, of death or betrayal. In the waning days of autumn, the entire tribe bustled with preparations for winter. Women dried meat and rendered fat for storage. Men built snow-covered caches for supplies, and children gathered sheep's wool and mended cold-weather clothing. Bat Erdene accompanied the old hunters, tracking snow deer, not to hunt, but to learn how to read the wind's path and find natural shelters. In each of these lessons, he learned not only how to live, but how to die with dignity. 3. Stranger in the Wind. One afternoon, as the wind shifted and the scent of snow drifted from the mountains, a stranger rode into camp. His face was caked with ice, his clothes torn, his hands bloodied. Chieftain Batbeleg welcomed him into his gyr, gave him hot tea, and asked where he came from. The stranger called himself Altan, from the eastern Bayad tribe, a place that had just endured a dzud, a deadly winter that decimated livestock, forcing people to resort to cannibalism to survive. He asked to stay, offering his strength in exchange for his life. Bat Erdene was suspicious, but his father accepted Altan without hesitation. "One who has seen hell," Batbeleg said, "will cherish the firelight more than we do." But Altan's eyes were not those of a man begging for life. They were like those of a wolf that had lost its pack. 4. The freezing begins. By late October, the Orkhon River froze. Nights grew longer than days. The wind, cold as a razor's edge, seeped into every crevice of the gyrs. All activity moved indoors. People told stories, mended tools, and taught children to read tracks on animal hides. Livestock were herded close to the gyrs, and wolves began to prowl the perimeter. One night, Bat Erdene awoke to the frantic whinnying of horses. He ran out to find a cut in a tether rope. Someone had deliberately tried to free a horse. In the moonlight, he glimpsed a fleeting shadow. The next morning, the horse was dead, half eaten. There were no wolf tracks. 5. First suspicions. Bat Erdine began to watch Altan. The man was friendly, hard-working, helped rebuild the food stores, and taught the young men how to cook meat with hot stones, an old technique now remembered only by the eastern tribes. But around the campfire, he never looked anyone directly in the eye. One night, Bat Erdene overheard Altan whispering in his ger, a strange language, not Mongolian. When Bat Erdane entered, Altan fell silent and smiled, saying he was talking to his ancestors. Ancestors sometimes need reminding that we are not yet dead, Altan said, and if necessary, one must ensure others die first. 6. The final lesson. Batbileg knew his time was near. He took Bat Erdine high into the mountains, to a place that had served as their ancestors' last refuge during the harshest winters. There, they found an old food cache buried under rock and snow, long forgotten. The cold here preserved everything. Dried meat decades old was still edible. Life is not found in warmth, Batbileg said. It is found where others believe only death resides. When they returned, Altan had become a leader among the children. He was trusted by the tribe. Bat Erdene, in contrast, was seen as too cold, too distant. Yet only he knew that this winter's chill was not just from the weather. It was cold because betrayal was kindling within the campfires. Part 2. Hidden fire in the snow. When survival isn't everything. Yertz. Dzot. The killing winter. Night fell, as if a giant hand had snuffed out the light. The wind wailed across the steppe, like the cry of an ancient demon. This winter was unlike any before. It arrived early, intensely cold, skin-biting, and unnaturally long. The elders called it Dzud, the infamous winter calamity of legend. Sheep starved, unable to dig for grass beneath the thick ice. Horses froze solid in the night. People began to boil shoe leather for sustenance, and share bone broth simmered for the third time in the chieftain's ger. Batbileg coughed heavily. He lay covered in wolf pelts, his back to the wall, his breath ragged. Bat Erdine sat beside him, gripping his father's old dagger, as if clinging to a belief that was melting away second by second. Are you ready? Batbileg asked, his eyes closed, but his voice clear. When the wind changes direction, so do the hearts of men. Bat Erdina didn't answer. Outside, Altan was leading the hunting party, a task traditionally reserved for the chieftain or his heir. He knew something had changed. There just wasn't enough proof. Not enough to press a knife to the throat of a man his father had saved. 2. Strange glances and a fracturing community. People began to whisper behind Batterdine's back. They said he was cold, unsupportive during these hard times. Meanwhile, Altan told stories, cooked, taught the children to braid rope from horsehair, and, most importantly, he was never hungry. In a time of famine, the one who is sated is the most feared. At a fire gathering, Altan stood up, his voice echoing in the large ger. We cannot let the tribe die slowly because of a rotten belief. There are ancestral food caches, abandoned. I know where they are, but I need people to go with me, not those who sit in their gers, waiting for the snow to melt. His eyes flickered towards Bat Erdine. A few people nodded, Many remained silent, but no one objected. 3. Blade in the darkness. That night, Bat Erdina was jolted awake by a slight noise behind him. As he rolled, a dark figure lunged with a short knife. The struggle took place in absolute darkness. Bat Erdina's dagger plunged into something soft. Then the warm wetness of blood gushed onto his hand. The figure collapsed. In the dim firelight, it was Tsokt, a young man from the tribe, someone Bat Erdin had saved from a frozen lake the previous year. "Forgive me. I needed food," Tsokt whispered before his breath failed. There was no trial, no punishment. The cold had made everyone fear starvation more than the law. 4. Losing a father, one morning, Bat Beleg didn't wake. Death came as gently as a breeze, but it left the gur heavy as stone. There was no funeral, only a smoldering fire and the indifferent gazes of those too numb to cry. Altan performed the farewell rites. He wore white, tied a black sash, and spoke like a rightful successor. The chieftain has departed, leaving behind a winter and a question. Who will lead us through this storm? At that moment, Bat Erdin stood amidst the crowd. No one turned to look at him. Not a single voice said, "He is the chieftain's son." The silence said everything. 5. The sweet trap. Altan began leading a group to find the ancient food caches. Bat Erdene wanted to go, but was refused. The reason? You need to stay and look after the old and the children. But he secretly followed the group under the cover of night. Beneath the thick snow, he discovered a trail leading to the mountain cave his father had spoken of, where their ancestors had once sheltered during a dzud. As he drew closer, he saw Altan and 3 others hauling food, weapons, and even furs from the ancestral cache. But instead of sharing it with the tribe, they were hiding it in a sleigh, heading east. When the tribe slowly dies, Altan said to his companions, "We will be the last survivors and the founders of a new tribe." 6. The counterattack begins. Bat Erdina didn't confront them directly. He quietly returned, sought out those loyal to his father, and told them the whole truth. They were skeptical. But then an old man, once Bat Beleg's comrade in arms, nodded. "If the dzud doesn't kill us, betrayal will." At the end of this part, Bat Erdin resolved to act. He was no longer the boy of autumn. He was the true heir. And this winter, blood would spill in the snow. Part 3. Blood on white snow. Power and betrayal. 1. The fracture. A week after Chieftain Bat Beleg's death, the tribe was clearly divided into 2 factions. One side was Altan's, famed as the hunger saver, the one who knew where to hide food and who promised a future of plenty. He led with his tongue and a giving hand. The other, scattered and weaker, consisted of those still loyal to Bat Beleg's bloodline, those who believed justice came not from a mouthful of food, but from honor and ancestral tradition. Bat Erdina led them. The 2 factions didn't fight, but they watched each other, like wild animals vying for the last water source. 2. The divided campfire. Previously, the entire tribe gathered around one large campfire each night. Now, there were 2 fires, 2 groups of people, 2 songs. Children were separated. The elders chose silence, but silence in a dzud was also a deadly choice. Bat Erdin didn't have many followers. He had only 7 who believed in him, a few horses, and the memory of what his father had taught. But in the bitter cold, ancient survival skills were more precious than dried meat. 3. Tactics of the Forsaken. Bat Erdini led his small group to a desolate, icy ravine known only to him from his hunting trips with his father. There, they set up temporary jurs in a mountain cave, sheltered from the wind, dug ventilation holes, burning dried dung and old fat to avoid creating smoke, stored water by collecting snowmelt dripped over heated stones, scarce but clean, trapped small animals like snow foxes, martens, and even steppe mice, using sharp-edged stones and horsehair snares. One night, a white wolf approached their camp, unafraid. Bat Erdine didn't kill it. He let it live, and the next day discovered it leading its pack to a nearby snowshoe hare. Warren, the Mongols believed wolves could be omens, or allies, if one knew how to coexist. 4. The Blizzard Raid. During a night of heavy snowfall, Bat Erdina led 3 trusted followers to raid Altan's food cache, buried deep under snow in a wind-sheltered cliff face. They managed to retrieve dried meat, weapons, and, more importantly, a map drawn by Bat Erdine's father, marking secret shelters from ancestral times. But as they retreated, they were discovered. The chase through the blizzard was a nightmare. Strong winds blew away all tracks, and light vanished completely. One of their group was struck by an oil-soaked, cloth-wrapped arrow, burning red against the white snow like a demon's tongue. Bat Erdina was wounded in the leg. He fell into a crevice, lying motionless in the darkness, cold, alone, blood mixed with snow. But in his hand was the map, their last hope. 5. Blood Oath. The next morning, when the snow stopped, Bat Erdine was rescued by Tomur, a man who had followed Altan, but fled because I don't want to live like a ghoul. Tomur helped him back to the ravine. Bat Erdine's group was now down to 4, including Tsatsral, a falconer girl who had saved his life twice. Together, under the moonlight, they swore an oath. If they couldn't win with numbers, they would use their wits, the wolves, the snow, and their own blood to restore order. 6. The final trap. Bat Erdina redrew the map, locating the largest ancestral cache mentioned, buried deep in the northern mountain range, an old sacred site. His plan was to lure Altan to this cache, feigning a compromise to share resources, then lead him into a place with no escape, an ice cave that could collapse with a small explosion. At the end of this part, Bat Erdine stood before the cave, wind howling in his ears, his eyes on the horse tracks gradually appearing in the distance. This is no longer a fight for the tribe, he whispered. This is a fight between men and the beast within them. Part War. Rebirth in the Ashes. 1. When the wind dies, death arrives. The sun was a dim orb behind a veil of ice fog. In the narrow mountain ravines, Bat Erdine and his small group prepared for the final confrontation, as much a battle as a farewell ritual. They rendered wolf fat for long burning torches, braided horsehair ropes for snares, sharpened stones by heating, and then suddenly quenching them in cold water, and dug a pitfall trap covered with dry branches and snow outside the ice cave. Survival was no longer about staying alive, but about fighting intelligently to the last breath. 2. The ice cave. A path known only to ancestors. The ice cave lay hidden beneath a mountain range called Sleeping Dragon's Belly. Not everyone knew the way in. One had to follow mossy stones arranged in a triangle, and only when the waning moon tilted west would the stone's shadows fall correctly to reveal the entrance. Inside, the temperature was cold enough to freeze the blood in one's heart within 15 minutes. But Bat Erdine knew how to stay alive, burning animal fat in stone bowls held close to the body, a small but safe source of heat, lining clothes with black marten fur and dried moss for warmth and light movement, breathing shallowly, conserving energy. The Mongols called it the warrior's breath. Inhale deeply, exhale in 3 short bursts. 3. The battle without triumph. Altan arrived with over 20 men. He didn't expect Bat Erdine to be not alone, and certainly not that the ice cave was a living trap. As soon as his group entered, the rear exits collapsed due to a rockslide mechanism Bat Erdine had prepared, learned from ancient legends of ancestors fending off Central Plains armies. Inside, the battle raged in darkness and echoes, stone clubs against iron, daggers against fire. Some slipped, others died from disorientation. Bat Erdine wasn't stronger, but he knew every crack in the cave. He struck when his opponents lost balance. He lured them into pursuit, then led them into dead ends, where rockfalls awaited. One of his group threw a fat-fueled torch at an ice wall, causing a reverse, cold explosion, a phenomenon his father had spoken of, where sudden heat caused thin ice to explode, collapsing the ceiling. Altan was buried under the ice. No one saved him. No one wanted to. 4. Rebirth from the ice. In the end, only 7 people emerged from the cave, alive, starving, exhausted, but alive. They didn't return to the old camp, a place rife with conflict and resentment. They followed the ancestral map to a small valley sheltered by 3 bow-shaped mountain ranges called Karkira, a place where the wind was still and grass grew even in winter. Here, they re-established a small community. They revived the technique of fermenting milk in animal skins in the cold, creating a nutrient-rich food called saga an idi, white food, buried food in layers of snow, ice, snow, gravel, creating a natural preservation system. Used horse fat mixed with ash to treat frostbite, and human breath through sealed animal hides to revive hypothermia victims. They survived not because of numbers, but because they believed in ancient knowledge instead of fighting for power. 5. A new summer. 3 months later, the ice slowly melted. Snow gave way to the steppe. Bat Erdane, now bearded like his father, stood on a high hill watching the newborn lambs amble by. Satsral's falcon soared high above, carrying messages across the region. The survivors have returned, not to be chieftains, but to keep the fire. He hadn't become the strongest, but he was the last one carrying ancestral memory, the ancient flame, and the indomitable will to survive. The fire of the survivors. In the long winter, where men chose betrayal to survive, Bat Erdine chose memory over killing, building over plunder. Despite the cold, despite the harshness, the Mongols always survived, not just by strength, but by wisdom, by community, and by traditions forged in blood and bone. Fire can be extinguished, but if a single breath remains, I will rekindle it. That is how our ancestors survived the Dzud. Bat Erdine. Chapter 1. Stranger in the Wind. Karkira. The 5th year. After the bloody winter, A gentle breeze blew across the steppe, a rarity as the seasons turned cold. The flock of sheep ambled past a half-frozen stream, the sun pale as a gray stone set in the sky. Bat Erdene sat on a large rock, stroking the feathers of Satsral's eagle, the bird that had been with him through all these years. His demeanor was calm, but his eyes were as sharp as when he first led his people through the Tsud. The Karkira region had changed. 30 households, 6 herds of livestock, and a survival council that rotated the coordination of food supplies, a model he'd never named, but people called the Order of the Dry Grass. A strange horn blast echoed from the west. No one in Karkira used a horn. Bat Erdene stood immediately. He signaled a young boy to climb the hilltop and send a warning. The boy nodded and galloped off like an arrow, leaving a trail of melting ice beneath his horse's hooves. Just half a day later, 5 figures appeared, trembling, staggering, as if they had stepped out of a frozen dream. They had no horses, only a small wooden cart with deer antlers attached, covered with a blood-caked frozen cotton cloth. The leader, a woman, her head shaven, her eyes as hollow as burnt-out rock sockets, looked up at Bat Erdene. "We come from Karatun," she whispered, her voice raspy. "They are no longer human. They burn the very earth to roast the flesh of the old. They drink blood raw, and they are heading this way." The entire camp fell silent. The old dream returns. That night, Bat Erdene did not sleep. He sat alone in his small goat-skin chair before the pale blue flame of sheep fat burning in a stone bowl. The Mongols believed that when the fire turned blue, ancestral spirits were present. Tsatsral, the girl who once hunted with falcons, now the keeper of the camp's fire, entered. Her eyes were full of questions. Without words, Bat Erdene just looked at the flame and said, "I thought I had reached the end of winter, but it turns out, beyond the cold, there is darkness." The horsehide scroll unfurled. The next morning, Bat Erdene retrieved an ancient horsehide scroll from the bottom of a chest, an incomplete map of winter shelters used by their ancestors. The old woman from Karatun pleaded, "There is a place where the earth does not freeze, where spiritual energy warms even the dead. Our people call it the heart of winter. If we cannot reach it, we will die." Bat Erdene looked at the map. The lines were faded, but a spiral symbol beneath a northwestern cliff face made his heart pound. It was the symbol of the ancestors' breath, a sign used only in the oldest legends, marking a place untouched by ice and snow, where time seemed to stand still. He nodded slowly. "If such a place truly exists, I will go." A new journey begins. That very afternoon, a group of 6 was chosen. Bat Erdene, the leader; Tsatsral, the firekeeper, who understood the ways of birds; Ganbatar, a quiet blacksmith, formerly one of Altan's soldiers, now seeking redemption; Merjan, a master hunter, son of a man killed by the Karatun; Galsan, the storyteller, who remembered over 100 legends of lost places; and Curly, a young woman who had escaped Karatun, carrying a fragment of an ancient eagle-bone flute. Each carried a skill and a secret. The night before they departed, Tsatsral spoke softly to Bat Erdene. "If that place truly exists, we will find it. But if not, then at least we will leave the last free breath of our people along the way." Chapter 2. Flesh-eating ice and phantoms in the marsh. 1. Passing through the first darkness. The group set off at noon. According to ancient belief, this was when ancestral spirits escorted the first steps out of camp. 6 people, 4 horses, 1 eagle. Everyone carried at least one traditional survival item. Ganbatar carried a knife forged from cold steel, mixed with the ashes of a loved one, both a weapon and a blood oath. Galsan wore an ancient, dry pine wood flute on his back, used to read the terrain by the wind's echo. A storyteller, but also a land censor, Tsatsral carried a leather pouch containing powdered island root, a substance their ancestors used to induce delirium in pursuers. Bet Erdina wore a piece of a map carved on saltstone, its markings only visible when dipped in boiling fat. They crossed snowfields and barren forests until they reached Tsetsen Tsaf, the frozen marsh, where the ice was said to eat people. 2. The frozen marsh, where death waits. No one liked Tsetsen Tsaf. Legend said it had swallowed an entire migrating caravan. There, the snow lay even and fine as rice grains. But beneath was a layer of liquid mud and toxic gas. One wrong step, and a person would sink to their chest in silence. Galsan knelt, pressed his flute to the snow surface, and blew gently 3 times. The sound echoed weakly, then was cut off. There's something, not earth, he whispered. Bat Erdina led the group along a path of ice moss, a type of dry moss their ancestors called old mountain's hair. It grew very slowly, only where solid rock lay beneath. Even so, as twilight fell, Curly, the girl from Karatun, took a wrong step. She screamed, her body sinking halfway, her leg pulled by something more than just mud. Ganbatar immediately threw a rope, but as he pulled, something pulled back from below. A gurgling sound arose. Then a pallid hand shot up beside her, black-nailed, gripping her leg. "It's not mud," she shrieked, her eyes wide with terror. Bat Erdene drew his knife, sliced off a piece of frozen fat, and threw it onto the mud. The fat sank. Then the entire patch of ground collapsed as if gutted, revealing a chasm as dark as hell. Ganbatar pulled hard. Tsatsral helped hoist the girl up, and they saw a figure wrapped in rotten cloth, trying to drag her down. It let out a silent scream. In the cold, sound seemed to shatter in mid-air. Galsan, trembling, said, "They are the ancient ones, swallowed by the marsh. Every winter, they awaken, because no one ever helped them out of the mud." 3. The secret in Curly's eyes. That night, they made a temporary camp on a rocky outcrop. Curly lay huddled in animal skins, shivering not from cold, but from memory. Badardina went to her. "You carry a piece of an ancient flute." "Why?" Curly replied, her voice hoarse. "Because my father was the last who knew how to play the call of the heart of winter. But Karatun killed him for daring to say it existed. They don't want anyone to know. There's a place to live without war." She held out a fragment of a black eagle bone flute, inscribed with 3 short lines, symbols of wind, blood, and ice. Ganbatar, who had been silent, suddenly turned away, something glittering in his eyes, either regret or cunning. 4 first night's fire, and the first curse. Bat Erdini used grizzly bear fat to light the fire. It burned for a very long time, but would attract phantom wolves if left burning overnight. But it was too cold. They had to risk it when everyone else was asleep. Badardina tended the fire alone. He sharpened his ancestral knife, his eyes still on Curly and Gunbatar. The wind howled in the distance, but it was no ordinary wind. A faint flute sound drifted from the direction of the ice forest. None of them were playing. Bat Erdine gripped his knife hilt, staring into the darkness. Someone is waiting for us to lose our way. Chapter 3. The Flute's Call from Karatun. Where there is no light, the wind began to change direction. From the north, gusts as cold and dry as razor blades swept across their backs. It was a sign. A white storm was coming. Bat Erdine felt it deep in his bones, as if the campfire no longer warmed his flesh, but only illuminated a growing suspicion within each member of the group. The one from the shadows. Early the next morning, when the group awoke, Galsan was gone. No tracks, no footprints leading away from camp, no sound, only his carved pinewood flute, stuck upright in the ground, broken in two, like a death message. Gunbatar said softly, "This is how Karatun deals with storytellers. They don't kill with a knife. They erase the voice." Bat Erdina clenched his fists. Galsan wasn't a warrior, but he was the living memory of their people. A man who knew hundreds of legends, understood the language of the wind, and could encode paths through sound. Losing Galsan meant the journey had become blind. 2. Eye sockets of the sky. The cursed relic. Atop an arched rock formation, the group found an ancient rock shelter where, according to legend, people had once taken refuge when ice covered the entire sun. The cliff face was carved with a three-eyed eagle, and at its base were hundreds of fingernail-scratched dots, as if the shelter had counted each day until death. Curly recognized it immediately. This is one of the 5 eyes of heaven, places where fragments of the ancient flute are hidden. Bat Erdine stepped into the rock shelter. The air inside wasn't cold, but warm, a warmth as if held from the earth's core. In the center of the hollow, a smooth black stone like horsehide, and upon it, another flute, made of verdigris-covered bronze, half corroded. As he reached for it, Tzatzral stopped him. "Wait, this flute isn't here by luck. It waits for blood." Bat Erdina nodded, drew his knife, and made a small cut on his palm. His blood dripped onto the stone. Instantly, the stone began to vibrate gently, and a moan like a dying person's echoed from deep within. The flute slowly detached from the stone and fell into his hand. At that moment, the very earth seemed to sway. 3. Karatun's first breath. The wind shrieked, not from the sky, but from the earth, and then screams echoed from afar, as if 100 people were being strangled simultaneously. Ganbatar looked into the distance. In the snow, a figure was walking towards them, not hurriedly, not stealthily, slowly, directly. The figure wore a wolfskin cloak, high-collared, and carried no weapons. But its eyes were black as burning ice. Curly trembled. "It's him, the one who killed my father. He has no name. People call him the Breathless Wolf, Karatun's assassin. He doesn't kill to win. He kills to maintain silence." Bat Erdine signaled a retreat. But the Breathless Wolf didn't pursue. He just stood there, watching them. Then he played a strange note on a flute made from human teeth. The sound pierced the ice, pierced the wind, and a flock of forest birds dove suicidally into the snow. 4. The Rift. When night fell, Bat Erdine played the newly acquired flute. The sound soared but it was incomplete. It needed 5 notes to open the wind gate. According to the old Karatun woman, Ganbatar sat alone, sharpening his knife. Tsatsral approached him, looking him straight in the eye. "What are you thinking?" Ganbatar gave a faint smile. "That if I brought this flute back to Karatun, I'd be spared, and maybe even made a commander." She drew her knife, pointing it at his throat. "Then why haven't you?" Ganbatar replied, "Because he, the breathless wolf, was the one who burned my wife alive, and I swore I would kill him with my bare hands." 5. End of a chapter. And the call from the mountain begins. The next dawn, Bat Erdena tried an ancient melody, a 3-note combination from the Beitar tribe of old. As he played, the ground vibrated gently. From a distant cliff face, a fissure opened, revealing a stone bridge leading into the heart of the mountain, where, according to legend, the heart of winter had been beating for centuries. Curly looked at it, whispering, "If we step inside, no one will come out the same." Bat Erdene clutched the flute, his gaze fixed on the distance, where a faint light emanated from something, not fire. Special chapter, The Breathless Phantom. 1. The one who leaves no footprints. The blizzard lasted for 2 full days. The group took shelter in a deep cave at the foot of the Imperial Ridge Mountains, where the wind howled like the cries of unburied spirits. Ganbatar said he smelled human ash, a scent only found in Karatun when they burned the living to intimidate enemies. Bat Erdena said nothing, but when the storm subsided, he left the cave alone, without a flute, without food, only his ancestral knife, and a message left for Tsatsral. "I once thought the cold was the most terrifying thing, but I forgot. There are men colder still." 2. Portrait of an Assassin. The Breathless Wolf was a legend, a name no one dared speak aloud. It was said he had survived 9 winters without killing a single animal, living instead on the flesh of those convicted of treason in Karatun. He didn't sleep, didn't eat in front of others, and left no trace of breath when standing near someone. A man stripped of humanity to become a living tool. He knew no anger. He knew no pain. He only knew the last order he was given. The bearer of the bone flute must die. All maps leading to the heart of winter must be burned with blood. 3. Slow steps into the white. Bat Erdena walked alone on the snow-covered mountainside. Not a bird, not an old footprint, only the feeling of being watched from all sides, as if the snow itself had eyes. And then, from ahead, without warning, the breathless wolf appeared. No sound, no wind, just a figure standing amidst the whiteness, as if born from the snow itself. Bat Erdena stopped, his gaze steady. "What are you? Human? Or what's left after war?" The breathless wolf did not answer. He drew 2 sharpened bone shards, the weapons he'd used since age 14, when he killed his parents on Karatun's first order. Then he lunged, like an arrow, without the whisper of wind. 4. Bare-handed. Combat in the wind. Bat Erdene dodged the first blow, but was lightly cut on the shoulder. Blood welled, but he didn't flinch. They wrestled amidst the ice. No words, only ragged breaths. The snap of a knife blade, the sound of snow being torn. Bat Erdene struck at his opponent's throat, where a piece of metal had once been implanted to block the vocal cords. The breathless wolf didn't even grunt. Ganbatar had once said, "To kill him, you can't use a knife. You must use memory." and Bat Erdine had prepared for that. 5. The forgotten name. In one throw, Bat Erdine pinned him to the ground, using his knife to cut deep into the leather jerkin, where an ancient script was inscribed in dried blood. Tsengel, son of Dolgen. That was the breathless wolf's real name, and what he had been forced to forget since his assassin training. Bat Erdina whispered in his ear, Tsengel, you were once human. You once had a mother. The breathless wolf paused, just for a moment, but that was all Bat Erdine needed. He used his knuckles to strike a pressure point beneath the jaw. Under the chin, the metal piece popped out, and he coughed up a stream of black blood. For the first time in decades, breath escaped his throat, and the first sound that came out was a hoarse sob. 6. The end. The breathless wolf sat in the snow, his eyes gazing into the distance. He fought no more. Bat Erdina did not kill him. He had been defeated, not by a knife, but by his old name. Bat Erdine handed him a piece of animal hide, on which was written, The heart of winter opens only to those who remember who they are. Then he turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the wind. 7. Return. With a question. When Bat Erdene returned to the cave, the group was astonished. Tsatsril looked at him, saw no new wounds, only eyes that were heavier, deeper. Ganbatar asked, Did you kill him? Bat Erdene replied, No, I just gave him back his breath. Chapter 4. The Wind Gate and the Price of Memory. 1. Opened by blood, not words. The Wind Gate was not a physical portal. It was a crack in the gray stone mountain, visible only when the 5 ancestral melodies were played on the sacred bone flute. Bat Erdine planted the flute into the icy ground. Curly stood behind him, trembling slightly, clutching her father's broken flute. Ganbatar held his knife, eyes scanning, ready for the final trap. First note, wind on the mountainside. Second note, wind blowing through the bones of the fallen. Third note, wind between 2 heartbeats. Fourth note, wind when a traitor sheds tears. Final note, wind when no one is left to remember. As the final note resonated, the ground trembled like a gasping beast. Then a fissure radiated from the center, extending into the mountain's heart, and wind from within blew outwards, not cold, but unnervingly warm. It's alive, Tsatsril whispered. This mountain, it breathes. 2. Labyrinth of bone and stone. Beyond the wind gate was a spiral system of caves, low-ceilinged, with damp walls covered in carvings. Not letters, but images of memories. Scenes of ancient tribes starving, betrayed, killing each other. Each cave wall was a sealed ancestral memory, and as each person passed through a section, a memory would pull them back to face it. Ganbatar was the first to stop. He saw his wife before him, Saran, burned alive in Karatun's flames, her lips still moving. You abandoned me, he screamed, thrusting his knife at the illusion. But the blade passed only through cold air. When Bat Erdine pulled him away, Ganbatar wept, for the first time since they began their journey. 3. Memories, belonging to no one, yet capable of killing all. Curly saw her father, old, white-haired, holding his flute amidst a pack of wild beasts. He didn't speak, just played a mournful tune, then collapsed. She wanted to rush to him, but Bat Erdine held her back. Don't. If you touch it, you'll live forever in that moment, and die for real here. Tsatsral stood frozen before herself. As a child, axe in hand, standing over her mother's horse-trampled body. Her mother had been sold by Karatun like an object in exchange for salt. No one escaped memory, except Bat Erdine. He walked through the cave sections as if unsummoned, because he had never kept memories for himself. He was raised to carry the memories of others. Without parents, without a homeland, he was empty, and only the empty could not be swallowed by the labyrinth. 4. The final level, the Pulse of Stone. After 4 levels of memories, they reached the heart of the mountain, a circular rock chamber, its walls veined with blood-red minerals, and in the center, a black, heart-shaped stone, beating. The heart of winter, Curly breathed. Legend said the heart of winter was a living crystal, containing the energy that kept the valley beyond the mountain from ever freezing. It was the place Karatun sought, to seize the only land that would survive the next ice age. Bad Erdine approached, drew his flute, and prepared to play the final call to awaken the hidden land. But just then, the entire mountain shook. A figure lunged. Ganbatar. He snatched the flute from Bat Erdine's hand, his voice trembling. No, if that land is opened, Karatun will seize it. We should destroy it. We can't let anyone survive. 5. Betrayal in the mountain's heart. Bat Erdene was thrown to the ground. Tsatsral rushed to stop Ganbatar, but he had already slashed at the heart of winter, and a stream of black blood spurted from the stone, causing the entire mountain to roar like a wounded beast. Curly screamed, "What have you done? That's a living heart. You didn't just break it. You've killed the last chance for the Mongol people." Ganbatar collapsed, muttering, "If I can't have it, no one can." At that moment, the cave ceiling began to crumble. Bat Erdine yelled, "Run! There's still a path to the east, a narrow passage to the living valley." He carried Curly. Tsatsral dragged Ganbatar, now unconscious. 6. End of a chapter, and the first glimmer of light. As the 3 escaped through the stone passage, the mountain collapsed behind them. The wind gate was buried. The heart of winter, lost forever. But ahead, a valley opened up. No snow, no wind, only green trees and a faint glimmer of sunlight. Tsatsral was stunned. It's still alive. Some of the energy still spread. The heart isn't completely dead. Bat Erdine sighed, his eyes on the distant forest. We are alive, but the next winter will be harsher, and Karatun will not stop. Chapter 5. The Silent Valley. The Flame of the Cursed. 1. The Windless Land, the valley that appeared beyond the wind gate, was a place unnamed on any map. The ancient Mongols called it Tengrin Am, breath of heaven. Grass grew green year-round. Hot underground springs steamed into mist. Animals reproduced ceaselessly. But the strangest thing was the silence. No birdsong, no wind, not even the rustle of leaves. Bat Erdine said, "This is a living heart, but it's sleeping. If it's awakened the wrong way, it will swallow us whole." They set up their gers on a hill of dry grass, placing circles of stones around them to prevent the spirits of the dead from merging with the earth's currents. Ganbatar was still alive, but severely injured, unable to walk. Tsatsral cared for him, though her eyes no longer held any trust. Curly stood on a mound each night, playing a soul-calling melody, waiting for her father to return from the snows. 2. Cracks in belief. The valley sustained them, but it also tested them. After 2 weeks, Gunbatar regained consciousness. But instead of remorse, he insisted, I did the right thing. The heart of winter is dangerous. It can create life, but it can also create war. Tsatsral retorted, and if everyone thought like you, there would be nowhere left for humans to shelter from winter. Internal rifts formed. Curly suspected Tsatsral for being the daughter of a chieftain who had betrayed the Batar tribe. Gunbatar suspected Bat Erdene for always remaining silent, as if hiding something. Bat Erdene only replied, to keep this living land, we must believe in what is still alive, not in a rotten past. 3. Fire and blood amidst young grass. One night, when the mist was as thick as a shroud, the sound of hooves echoed from the valley's edge. Not animals, not an illusion. Karatun had found a secondary entrance, and they had arrived. 3 light cavalrymen advanced first, wearing white tiger masks, the sign of the Annihilation Unit, those who came not to occupy, but to erase. Bat Erdine, Tsatsral, and Curly set traps with stones and vines, leading them into a hot gas marsh. 2 died. 1 was captured alive. That one, just a boy of about 14, with a tattoo on his arm. Soul sold for warmth. 4. The truth about Karatun's children, the prisoner confessed, in a voice both trembling and calm. Karatun no longer believes adults can survive. They train children, called the White Generation. No emotions needed, no parents needed, only obedience to orders. He was ordered to the valley, not to conquer, but to spread disease. Tsatsral turned pale. So, this isn't an attack. It's poisoning. Bat Erdine asked, are you carrying the sickness? The boy nodded. With a small gesture, he bit down on a ceramic bead hidden in his tooth. He committed suicide. His blood ran black, like the blood of the heart of winter, on the day it was struck. 5. Fighting death. With memory, the group was shaken. Gunbatar demanded they leave, but Bat Erdine said, you once betrayed. Now atone by keeping this place clean. No one is going anywhere. Curly, with herbal knowledge from her father, began brewing a soil disinfectant. Tsatsral took ash from the surrounding forest wood and drew sacred circles. Bat Erdine, standing in the middle of the valley, played his bone flute, intoning the forbidden melody, the call of old memories, to awaken the ancestral earth spirits. The earth's currents vibrated. The layer of toxic gas was pushed down into the streams. The next morning, the grass hadn't changed color, meaning the land was not yet tainted. 6. End of chapter. Oath of the survivors. When night fell, the 4 of them stood before a fire in the valley. Bat Erdene said, we are no longer a group seeking life. Now, we are the firekeepers. Each winter hereafter will be harsher, and if we don't pass this flame on, no one will live to see spring. Gunbatar bowed his head. Tsatsral tightened her grip on her knife. Curly looked up at the sky, playing a new melody, no longer calling the dead, but calling the unborn. Chapter 6. The White Generation. When children become hunters. 1. Wind carries, not snow, but fire. 3 days after the death of the disease-carrying child, the sky turned ash gray. In the valley, there was no blizzard, but a strong wind blew from the north, carrying the smell of burnt fur and ore smoke, characteristic of Karatun. Bat Erdine stayed awake all night. He reset the warning stones, carving more ancestral symbols around the fire circle. But his eyes couldn't hide his anxiety. Curly whispered, this time, it's not scouts. It's a hunting party. Ganbatar, though still in pain, had fashioned himself a wooden crutch, tying a sharp knife to the end like a spear. They're coming to take it, or to burn it all. 2. Those who come in white shadows, midnight, small figures, no taller than a horse's back, appeared on the valley rim. They didn't make camp, didn't light fires, just watched in silence. When dawn broke, Bat Erdeen's group saw them clearly. Children, aged 10 to 16, pure white fur cloaks, wooden masks with no mouths, only 2 black eye holes, and the red-blooded Karatun circle symbol on their foreheads. Ganbatar hissed, "They don't talk. They don't know fear." Bat Erdeen said gravely, "They're not allowed to remember. Those children have been cut off from memory, from family, from their names." Tsatsril nodded. The white generation, the tearless generation. 3. Silent attack. As night fell, the children poured in like a white wave. They didn't shout, made no sound, moving in small groups of 4 or 5, coordinating like wolves. They used short crossbows tipped with tranquilizer, curved daggers designed for cutting tendons, and especially a gray smoke that paralyzed adults for a few minutes if inhaled. Bat Erdeen, Hurley, and Tsatsril split into 3 directions. Ganbatar, despite having only one good leg, hid on high ground with a crossbow, an explosive packets Curly had made, ready to collapse the wooden bridge leading to the center. The first clash erupted when Curly encountered a girl of about 12, her eyes soulless, lunging with a gutting knife. Curly couldn't bring herself to strike. "Don't do this. You're human. You can stop." But the girl cut her own arm to draw blood, a scent that lured her comrades. Bat Erdeen appeared in time, played his flute, diverting the children's attention, and carried Curly back. 4. Counterattack of the madman. Tsatsril, on the left flank, used ancient nomadic tactics, releasing horses as decoys, setting rolling stone traps, burning grass to create smoke mazes. The children were separated, but one group found Ganbatar. They climbed trees, leaping like lynxes. One threw a knife that hit Ganbatar in the shoulder, nearly severing his left arm. In agony, Ganbatar pulled the pin on his explosives. "I'm not atoning. I just don't want to die a coward." Boom! The wooden bridge exploded. An entire squad of children was buried under rock, snow, and burning wood. Ganbatar fainted, but wasn't dead. 5. End of blood, and a question of humanity. When morning came, the valley was shrouded in white smoke. 20 children were captured alive. 6 were dead. One survivor cried. For the first time, the first tear Tsatsril had seen from a white warrior. Bat Erdena said nothing. He stood silently. Curly applied medicinal leaves to Ganbatar's wounds. Tsatsril cut the children's bonds, placed food before them, and then asked, "Does anyone remember their name?" One, the smallest boy, said softly, "Altai. My mother used to call me that." 6. Fire burns. Again, but this time in human hearts. Tsatsril turned to Bat Erdena. "We won. But then what? They are children. They can learn again. They can be loved." Bat Erden. "If we can't save them, Karatun will continue to use new generations, and this valley, gradually, will no longer be a place of life, but a burial ground for everything we try to preserve." She asked, "Will you forgive Ganbatar?" Bat Erdena was silent for a moment, then said, "No need for forgiveness, but I will let him live, because he chose to sacrifice." That night, The fire burned again, not for warmth, but to keep the children alive and help them start over from their first memory.